Hello, my name is Megan Schlickman. I'm the owner of Nexus Financial. I help businesses all across the country with Jobber and QuickBooks and the sync issues and maintaining the accounting side. The introduction to my video tutorial got cut off, so this is me hopping in and saying hello. So let's jump right here to help you solve unapplied cash payment income account. When you're inside of QuickBooks and you're running a P&L, depending on which report you're running, either a cash or an accrual, you may have this unapplied cash payment income account balance. So I'm working in this cleanup and I want to fix this. I'm working in 2024 account, and for this 2024 account, I am trying to get this unapplied cash payment income down to zero. What happens when we have this account is that payments received are not being matched to invoices for a few reasons. The first reason is that you received payment before the invoice was finalized. This is very common if you require a deposit on a quote before it's converted to an invoice. Because if you think of the Jobber to QuickBooks sync, the invoice is not pushed to QuickBooks until the invoice is finalized. And in Jobber, the invoice is not finalized until after the quote has been accepted and then converted into an invoice, right? So we often do have an unapplied cash payment income, but when I'm seeing this account balance really high, that is kind of ringing off a little alarm bell to me that something is not correct. So we need to go investigate. Again, just as a reminder that the filter dates need to be the dates that you're working on. For cleanup projects, I usually look at a year as a total, or maybe if somebody comes to me mid-year, then I'm working like January to June. Second thing, make sure this is a cash report and select Run Report to refresh the report. You can't just select on the green dot and it automatically refresh. All right, so the report is refreshed. I'm gonna bring it on down to this unapplied cash payment income line item here. Once the report pulls up, we have this from date order from January the earliest to December. And what I'm seeing here on the right-hand side is the payment coming in first, and then it was converted to an invoice a few days later, and that's where we see it zero out. This is what I want to see. This is perfect. Now, there's a few things in this account specifically that I do need to highlight. Based on where this customer is at, they do charge sales tax, and the sales tax calculation between Jobber and QuickBooks is not always perfect, so we often get a 1 penny rounding error here. With this account, I'm okay with this 1 penny rounding error. This 1 penny is not alarming to me. This is not one I'm going to fix, so I know I'm going to carry a 1 penny balance here. If I'm dealing with 100 invoices that have a 1 penny rounding error, then I know in total I'm going to have a $1 difference, right? So again, I'm not too focused on the 1 penny. This could be a variety of reasons. Usually it's the sales tax rounding error between Jobber and QuickBooks. The other option is if a client paid you a penny more or a penny short of what the invoice balance is. That's often the case, either if they're paying with check or cash. Sometimes the amount you're receiving is not the same as the invoice amount, so that's where we often get maybe 1 or 2 pennies carried balance here. Again, so I expect this 1 penny balance to go up, but what I do not expect is a much greater balance here. For example, we see this customer's listed on January 22nd, but I see it a few days later negative balance out. So the very tedious way to do this would be to scroll through and you're kind of keeping track here of what's been going on, what's going out. It's pretty good to me that it's zeroing out here besides the 1 penny difference errors. But what I'm seeing down below is that a lot of these are building up and they're not zeroing out. So I know that there's some payments applied to the customer account balance that isn't being applied to the invoice. So we need to fix that. So I mentioned the tedious way to do it. You can kind of track on the computer here, but what I prefer to do is to export this to Excel. I'm going to pull up my Excel sheet and show you how I'm working in there. All right, so here is my Excel sheet. I pulled the information into the Excel sheet. I highlighted the table. I made a normal table with headers. And now what I'm doing is I'm filtering by the customer name. I hid the customer name from your view just for privacy reasons, but this is really easy way to tell if the customer name coming in has the matching invoice being applied to it. So for example, this first line item is a penny. I'm not too worried about it. There's not going to be a matching negative penny for this. The second row here, you're going to see that there is not a negative balance compared to this. What happened in this client situation is that they just had the quote and it was never converted into an invoice because this was the full quote balance. So there's not going to be a negative taken out. The best practice, now I don't love what they did here, but the best practice to do is always convert that to a invoice, even if the balance is 0, and it should match out. Since this is from like a year ago, I'm not too worried about fixing it because I can fix it on my end. But moving forward, I'm coaching this client that yes, even though they paid it in full, we still need to convert it over to an invoice so that the invoice pushes over to QuickBooks. So again, for the purpose of this video, probably not a good example, but I'm really using real life problems here. So I'm just going through. I've already worked on fixing a lot of these, so we're going to see some differences in what I'm seeing in the Excel sheet versus what's inside of QuickBooks. Inside the Excel sheet here, for this customer name, I know there's a payment and then an invoice converted a few days later, payment, invoice converted a few days later, payment, invoice converted into a few days later. I'm going to scroll down to my next one that is incorrect, and I'm going to show you what I'm going to do. So for the next invoice line item that I'm going to be looking at is this one on July 5th, 2024. We see this payment, but we don't see the matching invoice to minus it out. Sorry for words today. And so I need to investigate why this invoice didn't sync over to QuickBooks or why this didn't get applied to the invoice. How I'm going to do this is I am going to look at her Jobber account. Inside of Jobber here, what I am seeing, I pulled up this customer account inside of Jobber, and I am seeing that there was a deposit on the quote for that dollar amount. Then it was converted to an invoice for the full amount, and then there was a second payment to zero out the invoice here. So when I'm inside of QuickBooks, I'm going to scroll down. Remember, I liked to filter this out by the client name inside of my Excel sheet just so I don't have to track months over months. So we're going to scroll down to July to find this customer payment here. I'm going to open this up, and the full converted invoice should have synced on over to QuickBooks. Here it is. I see that same original amount. The open balance is what this payment received amount is. This needs to be green check mark. I know that the second payment to the invoice is already applied to here because QuickBooks is pretty good about matching that after the invoice has been created, but QuickBooks is not good about matching it to the quote. So this is me really matching it to the quote that was converted to the invoice. I'm going to hit save and close. And that is it that I need to do for that client account. Now, remember, if I'm going to be looking at my Excel sheet, the Excel sheet is not going to refresh with this new information that I just did inside of QuickBooks. I'm just making a mental note on my Excel sheet here that, yes, indeed, this 3,700 is now taken care of. Now I'm moving along. This next client's taken care of. Here's a new client that I do not see because I filtered in name order. I do not see the invoice being applied here. So this is my next one I'm going. All right, for this next one for $216.50, I am going to pull up that information inside of Jobber. Again, I see the deposit on a quote. It was converted to an invoice, and the second payment is most likely already matched inside of QuickBooks. So I'm going to go into QuickBooks, and I am going to go find this customer account. This payment was made in June, and we are going to find her here. All right, awesome. So again, that full invoice amount should have been pushed over in the second payment, but the open balance for that original invoice for the deposit on the quote has not been matched. So here we go. We match, save, and close, and that is how we fix it. That is pretty much it. The few outliers I kind of already highlighted, again, is that one, if you have sales tax applied, the rounding between Jobber and QuickBooks could be off by a penny or two. So I'm not too worried about the penny dollar ones. And then if you have a customer who has a deposit on a quote and that quote was never converted to a full invoice, that's when we're going to have a balance here. So I know I'm going to have a higher balance than just a couple pennies for these invoices because this customer didn't always convert all of the completed quotes into invoices, but as I'm coaching them to always convert it to an invoice, even if it's a remaining $0 balance, that will help this account go down to 0. Another way that you're going to see this balance increase is if somebody overpaid an invoice. If you invoiced for $2,000 and they paid $2,010 or something, you're going to see that $10 balance here because there's no invoice to match that payment to for the additional $10. If you have any questions, you can always reach out to me on my contact information below. Let's do a consultation call. I can do a diagnostic review of your QuickBooks to see where you're at. I also do this really for a living. I work in Jobber and QuickBooks all day long, so if you are looking to pass this off to somebody else, I would be more than happy to assist. Awesome job, guys.